Hi, Michelle Glass here. Welcome to our first installment in our Chapter 22, Lecture 22 series. And we're going to start in Unit 2 with Part 1, and then we'll finish our discussion at the very beginning of Unit 3. So we're going to be hitting here basically an overview of the lymphatic system, and then moving into what are described as your non-specific defenses. So let's get started. We already know from Chapter 1 of the course that the job of the lymphatic system is defense. And what we really see then is that the lymphatic system has the job of producing and maintaining and circulating what are called our lymphocytes. And these are going to be our white blood cells that are involved in what we typically refer to as our immune response. Now, when we talk about defense, there's actually two types. So we have what's called our nonspecific defense, which is very generalized. This is, we don't identify who the foreign pathogen is. We don't care. In the nonspecific defenses, we just know that it's a foreign invader and we need to do our best to keep it out of the body or attack it and remove it if it gains entry. The specific defenses then are more particular. So in the case of your specific defenses, this is where we get into what we think of as our immunity. The specific defense is where we identify name, rank, serial number of our pathogens, and not only do we mobilize defenses to get rid of them right now, but we also remember these invaders and we are ready to attack them super fast the next time we see them. With the specific defenses, this is where we really see our lymphocytes being involved, and this is what we are saving for the first part of our Unit 3. So this information is still in Chapter 22, but we're going to save it for Unit 3. When we talk about the lymphatic system, in addition to those lymphocytes, we have other components. So we have the fluid of the system, which is called lymph. We have a whole network of lymphatic vessels, so we'll have a presentation just on these. Now, these vessels are going to be transporting that lymph throughout the body and then ultimately dumping that fluid directly into circulation at both the left and the right subclavian veins. And so this is how this fluid gets back into our circulation. We will also see a group of lymphoid tissues and organs, which we're going to talk about in this video. And then in addition to those fancy lymphocytes involved in our picky specific defenses, we also have what we can call lymphoid cells, and these are primarily phagocytes. I mean, the big one is going to be the macrophage. So we'll talk about it. We've already talked about it before many times, and we'll see it again involved in our lymphatic system. Okay, so we said that we have lymphoid tissues and organs. We have what are described as our primary lymphoid tissues and organs, and this list is limited to just the red bone marrow and the thymus. And so these are places where the lymphocytes are being formed and matured in the red bone marrow, and some of those are being formed and matured in the thymus. So we see that our primary lymphoid tissues and organs are involved in this formation and maturation of those lymphocytes. Our secondary lymphoid tissues and organs are more those locations of where those lymphocytes are activated, where they're really doing their job. The big group here, the primary thing is what's called the MALT. MALT stands for mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Mucosa is basically that innermost epithelial lining of, well, everything. So we're going to see it lining respiratory tract, digestive tract, urinary tract, reproductive tract, any orifice or passageway that has, entry from the external environment into the body is aligned with mucosa. And so then embedded in with that, you have the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. The tonsils and the appendix are actually part of the MALT. So this is not really a fancy structure, but it is the thing doing the big job here in the lymphatic system. We also see lymph nodes described and the spleen described as important secondary organs. So let's talk a little bit about those lymphoid nodules. What are they exactly? A lymphoid nodule is really just connective tissue, specifically areolar tissue, full of lymphocytes. It has no distinct boundary, so it doesn't have any kind of capsule that's going to make it different from lymph nodes that we'll talk about here in the future. And again, it's basically this collection of areolar tissue embedded deep to the epithelial lining of all of the passageways in the body. So that's including your respiratory tract, digestive, urinary, and reproductive tracts. Your tonsils and your appendix are all classified as part of the MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. When we talk about lymphoid organs, we're going to see basically three. So we have a whole category called lymph nodes. So this is a whole collection. And then we have our thymus and we have our spleen. You're going to be looking at these structures as part of your lab anatomy. So I'm going to go just real generic in our discussion of the lymph node and let you pick up more detail as you study that in your laboratory. Lymph nodes are different from lymphoid nodules because they are surrounded by dense connective tissue capsules. So it is like a distinctive structure that can be easily, dissected and removed. So that's one of the things that's going to make it different. Essentially, the job of the lymph node is to filter out pathogens as that lymph is traveling through the lymphatic system. So the way I imagine this is our lymph is passing through those lymphatic vessels, and you have these stations or lymph nodes, located throughout that lymphatic system. And as the lymph passes through that area, it has to go through this lymph node station, and that's when you're going to be filtering out 99% of any pathogens. Remember, ultimately, we're going to be dumping this lymphatic fluid, this lymph, into the left and right subclavian veins, and now it's in circulation and it has access to the entire body. So before that lymph gets dumped into circulation, you need to remove any pathogens that might be present. So what's really happening inside the lymph node? You've got, again, that dense fibrous connective border, and inside you have it full of macrophages and lymphocytes. So we're able to identify pathogens as being foreign. Those phagocytes are going to engulf and remove. We have special lymphocytes that will act as assassins or killers and target those pathogens and kill them. So we're going to be actively killing pathogens or phagocytizing pathogens, some way, somehow removing like 99% of viruses and bacteria from that lymph. Notice that you have lots of entries. So you have lots of places where the lymph is coming in. Moving into the lymph is described as an afferent vessel. Moving out is the efferent vessel, the exit. So you have just a single exit point, taking it back into that lymphatic circulation. Let's look next at our thymus. Now, the thymus is most important when we're little people. So we see from infancy to puberty that the thymus is super active, and once you get to onset of puberty, the thymus activity begins to decline so that it's not really active as we get into older adulthood. The thymus is going to be responsible for the maturation of special lymphocytes called T cells. They're named T cells for the thymus because that's where they are maturing. We will be talking about the T cells a little bit in our presentation or our set of videos here in part 1, and then we'll be talking about them in a lot of detail when we look at those discussion of specific defenses. So our T cells are basically, they're killer cells. They're going to be able to identify foreign cells and kill them. The thymus is helping to mature these T cells by releasing a whole group of hormones, which are collectively referred to as thymosines. So we don't need to go into the specifics on those. Just knowing thymosines are released by the thymus and are important in maturing T cells will be enough. And then our spleen, we've talked about it already. Remember, this is where those macrophages are located that are involved in the recycling of old and damaged red blood cells. And so the spleen really is acting like this massive lymph node for the bloodstream. So just like the lymph is passing through lymph nodes in order to filter out 99% of pathogens, the blood is filtering through the spleen and it's acting as a blood filter. So not only is it removing those old, damaged, worn out red blood cells, but it's also helping to initiate the immune response if pathogens are identified. So we're going to see both B cells and T cells involved in this. These are, again, two special types of lymphocytes. We'll introduce them more here in a little bit and then talk about them in a lot of detail in Unit 3. In addition to this, we see that the spleen is also involved in storing that iron that's part of that recycling process for those old and damaged red blood cells. Okay, and that's it for now.